welcome back to the Countertop podcast, where we all bring topics to the counter, and we are just going to go through and discuss, have fun. Can be serious, can be um, funny, all over the place. Sometimes you may have interest in it, sometimes you may not, but that's what we're hoping to bring you is a little bit of everything. Um, we are on Apple Music, Spotify, all of the major streaming podcast sites, as well as YouTube and Twitter. We'll shortly probably have an Instagram, a TikTok, a Facebook. We'll just go
Oh
through
God,
all of it.
Coming soon.
Coming soon. So if you're enjoying the podcast, feel free to jump over to YouTube as well, and you can watch the video version of it, of us just kind of virtually sitting around a countertop. So we'll jump into it, and Tanner, I'll let you go ahead and start with your topic.
yeah. So I guess housekeeping stuff. I've got nothing from the last episode to really touch base on. I know there's been news developments on some of the items from episode 2, but as far as with corrections or any kind of updates, does anybody have anything?
No,
No, I think
nothing
Nvidia
to
is still
expand on.
flopping, so I think we,
Yeah.
we nailed that one pretty well.
Yeah, and you saw the same with PlayStation and Xbox as well on that one as well. But,
Yep.
um, so I wanted to take a little bit of a turn from we kind of went tech heavy the first two. Um, and then one of the things that's near and dear to my heart that I wanted to bring up was plastic. So
Can we get
wait,
clarification, not dildos?
yeah, no, this
Okay.
is specifically plastic is unique because it doesn't break down. It, it's essentially indestructible. And so after an estimated 450 years in the ocean, it starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but never actually goes away. And this is a little bit different than your typical. Should we use straws, right? Um, I'm not going to
Save the
talk about the
turtles.
turtle, right? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the turtle. Um, but what I was going to bring up was that there's essentially in 2010, it's estimated right now that 8 million metric tons of plastic entered our oceans. Uh, Currently, according to NOAA, which is the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, right? They they have a nice little thing. I don't know if you could link it in some of the posts on
Yeah,
YouTube
no,
or
we'll
however you
make
might
sure
do
to
that.
post that in our YouTube links.
But essentially, what the topic I want to discuss was one, viable solutions, some things that companies are doing in the private sector to try and mitigate this problem, but also just share the understanding that this exists. And there's the Great Pacific garbage pile.
Yeah.
If you guys don't know about it, but it's a huge plot of it's not like heaps of garbage, but it's all of the microplastics that exist because of the way the tides go around our oceans. They all settle in one area where there's no strong tides, and it exists out there as it sits right now. I think it's like the size of Texas, but nonetheless,
It's
the
crazy.
only way to remove it is to actually go out there and grab it, which is an immense cost, of course.
Yeah.
But there's one group called the Ocean Cleanup, which I first learned about from the Joe Rogan podcast, which was this young 16-year-old kid who had an idea about how to remove plastics from our rivers and the oceans. And it's what he dedicated his life to, which, I wish I had a cause that I, kept with for
What
that
were you doing
long.
at
But
16?
yeah, but one of the things they have is this thing called the interceptor. And what it does is they've identified that 80% of the river plastics stem from just 1,000 rivers. And so, of all of the plastics going into our oceans, they've identified the top major rivers that are contributing. And they've developed a system to intercept that plastic from going from these major river systems into the ocean to stop it at its source. They're also going out into the the ocean and retrieving it there. Um, so I'll just stop before I go into the next one and just kind of open it up to any kind of comments there.
So with their system, and I think I've seen an article or maybe even the Joe Rogan podcast, but isn't his way of cleaning up the ocean kind of super cost efficient with how he ended up coming up with this system to do it. It wasn't some crazy amount, or am I think there? I know I'm sure there's a bunch of different people and companies doing this, but um, that project isn't for whatever system he came up with. I thought it was very unique and cost efficient. Am I right on that? I don't know if you know
So
that.
the interceptors are really interesting because it's a stationary object that basically uses a buoy system to divert garbage into a hopper, and then they're able to remove the hoppers, which makes it kind of a even though there's a finite amount you can collect, which is kind of the downfall of most of these systems. Um, they still have to be removed and manned.
Gotcha.
Um, but it's is very costly is the actual plastics and microplastics that are out in the ocean, because
Yeah.
essentially what you have to do is they create a barrier, and go slightly slower than the tide to allow the ocean to actually filter through their nets to collect the items, and then they have to actually go get it, and they have to haul it back to land.
Yeah.
Right now, for the ocean clamp specifically, they're going to target the revenue source of that, to being generating 100% recycled plastics from that project, and you can go out and actually have the first loads that are coming in. There's a better, well-known group that had the largest haul. I'll have to look that up while we go on, but they're not the only two. These are just the two, I guess, that have come up recently. That I'll kind of get to my last point here in a minute, but they also have dock systems from a company called Seabin Project, and it's based out of Australia. And Seabin Project is really interesting because the folks are trying to develop more agile systems that could be deployed at smaller, docks, buoys, private clubs, your own personal dock outside your house to help with the problem. And these ones essentially have a small catch bin, like a trash bin, and they skim off the top layer of the water. And so it's kind of passive in that
Yeah.
if trash happens to go by, it will be captured, but it's not active in going and seeking it out.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit different, but I think it's still a really good idea and something that I've reached out to them, to say, hey, um, wouldn't it be amazing if the National Star Registry?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that? Right, where you can unofficially name a star after someone, get it on a registry book, and it'll stay there for a monthly charge.
Mhm.
Um, I looked it up a bit, but wouldn't it be amazing if you could do that with these type of eco projects to help not only raise awareness, say you're giving a gift to someone, you're naming a bin after them, or naming an interceptor after them, or being a co-founder on them, to try and create not only faster deployment to the field, but also just general awareness. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what my topic was.
One, I think you should go work for their marketing team because that's an awesome idea. I don't think you should have sent that email. I think you should have kept that one close and used it.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's just crazy to think that, and I think if it's not in your face, no one thinks of it. I'm sure if you were to go talk to random people on the street, half of them, if not less, would have any idea on this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably haven't even heard of a lot of these systems or the trash island that's floating around. Honestly, I feel like every time I bring that up in conversation, which doesn't happen often, but a lot of people I'm with that hear it don't know about it.
Yeah,
Obviously, people know plastic waste is an issue, but I feel like they don't look as far as in the oceans or possible air pollution related to these things. So it definitely is a good idea.
yeah, no, it's interesting to, it's a good thing that we're going after it. I would be surprised if any major companies don't try to get behind this to, like a GE or an HP or some company that kind of forces the issue on pushing for this, and then hey, we're using that plastic, kind of marketing scheme to help them in a better light, but then also pushing towards using all of that plastic for their products. That's some, there's a lot of benefit to that, and there's a lot of companies that do that today that
Yeah.
try to, but it'd be interesting to see. I think from a standpoint of saying, well, we got all this plastic from landfill, it's not exciting. But if you're saying we got this out from the ocean, like I think there's something to that as well that I think could be used, and it may be happening right now, and I just don't know about it. But I definitely think that's, it'd be a good thing to do, and just for humanity and these companies to get behind it.
Yeah.
So here's stats for you. Generally interesting. According to National Geographic from a 2017 article, right? A little past dated, but still good numbers. In 2017, 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic have been produced. Of that, 6.3 billion metric tons have become plastic waste. Of that, only 9% of all plastic ever produced has ever been recycled.
Wow,
Oh.
that's
Uh,
disturbing.
Yeah.
right. And based on that, currently it's estimated between 1.15 to 2.41 million tons of plastic are entering the ocean every year from rivers.
That's so much.
More than
Math.
half of the plastic is less dense than water, meaning it will sink, or it will not sink once it encounters the sea. So the more buoyant the plastics are, the more resilient it is to marine environments, meaning that it transports over greater distances. um, those type of things we see. There's from I forget exactly where I saw, but it was just so impactful to know that in the deepest areas of the ocean, we are detecting plastic. In every single marine life, we're detecting pieces of plastic. It's already permeated our entire ecosystems, and the only way to get rid of it, according to NOAA, right? That's our government saying there's only two strategies that work. One, reduce plastic use, or two, participate in cleanup. Those are the only two options our government says can happen or can have an impact on the plastic pollution in the oceans.
Well, I think right there that needs to be, there has to be more options to be able to help. I know, those are the kind of the cut and dry, I guess, options, but I just felt like if they were to push towards other solutions, that would help.
And there are
Maybe
a
get,
lot of other countries that do that. I think the argument for it is funding, like everything
yeah,
else. It's hard to fund something like that when you're already tapped out with the way that we fund everything else. So a
yeah,
lot of this is going to come down to private funding, and that's why ideas like yours are a good idea with naming boats and something as simple as that. It's kind of gimmicky, but people know they're putting that money to a good cause, and it not only helps them bring awareness to it, but it helps solve a little bit of that funding issue. If someone's willing to pay to put their name on a boat or someone else's name on a boat, it's all just going to get rolled back into that cause.
Right, and it doesn't have manufacturing costs. I mean, one of the, there's been lots of things that are floating around about, top pollutions, which I'm not a tree hugger by any means. I mean, yes, I work in renewable energy, as my profession for many years, but granted, 90% of the people who fix those things, man, we're all gun-toting rednecks driving diesels. I mean, it's not like everyone's a hippie who works on them things. But this one is just so profound that you go, yeah, there isn't any government project that exists for the cleanup. It's all private enterprise right now, and private enterprise are trying to do crowdfunding through things like hat sales or pre-sales on things generated from the plastic recovered. Um, those are only, you have to first navigate to the website before you see that,
yeah.
and it's very passive on that. And so they have really good things that hopefully you could provide those links for folks who might be interested. But there's even on the coral reefs, there was a Netflix documentary about the bleaching of the coral reefs. Those sites actually have prop-ups where they'll provide resources to classrooms for education and things, and these type of ocean cleanups also have those, which is important. So
Yeah.
Wow, you really brought me down.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's crazy to think about, the ocean being one of the main areas that humans have not explored fully,
Kind of
and
neglected.
yeah, and so I just imagine like what are we killing? Things that we haven't explored that you're going to find out in 30 years from now that there was some, you know, dinosaur down there living that we ended up killing with plastic or whatever it is, or this certain energy that we could have been using, and we killed it with plastic. Like, just all of those things that you don't even, the impact is so grand. I know, we don't live in the ocean, so people don't think like, oh, we'll be fine and throw away your bottle. But
That's part of the issue too. We don't live in the ocean. As long as states and countries that are bordering oceans keep that area clean, people are generally not gonna give a shit about it. That's why I think general awareness for sustainability in itself, is important. And then people can kind of delve down into these more specific regions that maybe they don't see are being affected and start trying to help those. That's another argument in itself, just general awareness.
yeah,
But
I think we
I do think that's part of it.
petition California to not clean their beaches for 6 months, and that's the way of getting awareness towards how crappy it'll look.
Well, one of these days I'll have to get into climate change for you, because I think one of the biggest you know failures for people who are advocating for climate change is that they're not using the right words to describe what specifically triggers, or what specifically uh, they're measuring. And quite simply, you know it started in the 60s, where people said it was generally determined as unsure, right? We didn't call it global warming then, we said unsure climate change. And it has to do specifically with the numbers of parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And essentially all they were saying back then, and it continues now, is that an increased number of parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere changes the total atmospheric content, and it is going to have an unknown effect. And then as we got further along and we saw that numbers of parts per million go up and up and up and up astronomically, they said, oh, this is starting to be the effect. And so they named it global warming. And then global warming got just tore down, and then it switched to climate change. But essentially, there is a very known quantity of CO2 in the atmosphere that people are measuring in parts per million. And it's been tracked for since the 60s. Now, they have things like core samples and things that they're trying to determine prior to that. Um, but there's a lot of, if you go into Met towers and collection of data as well as satellites to determine those quantities, it gets really, really interesting. But that's one of those things where I think folks who are, as our president said, last week, I don't think science knows. It's just fucking stupid, because it's very specific what it's measuring. And then as it relates to the oceans, one of the craziest things that you can know about is that um, what's our biggest heat sink on this planet?
Ocean.
Yeah,
It's the ocean.
oceans.
Right. And so
trick question
no,
there.
it's not, because light comes through and it absorbs all of the light and reflects back blue. That's why the ocean is blue.
Yep.
Okay. Well, if it has less propensity to absorb radiate or heat, energy, whatever else, as that temperature climbs, you're going to affect clouds, you're affecting, habitats for folk. You're doing a whole bunch of things that you're affecting the heat sink of our world. And that's where I think it all ties into, okay, plastic is one thing, it's really gross too, but if you go into climate change, it's also hitting those items. And then if you also think about fishing, we know that Japan has taken over quota for the past two decades in terms of its fish supply, which makes it, even fishing into areas where they're not supposed to. Essentially, what people are missing in the whole climate change calculation is that we're a part of a system. We are bastardizing that system through the use of gathering resources, and you can't necessarily blame Japan in whole, because they're an island and they have a population and they have to feed that population. And if you look at great, documentaries like Blackfin, where they're talking directly to those the folks in Japan who are trying to feed their masses. They say, "This is my job. I have to feed people." And what else are you going to do? They don't have enough land mass in agriculture to feed them, so it has to come from the ocean, and it becomes a very complex problem. And it's not something you're pointing the fingers. It's just, this is life.
Yeah.
And that's, like you said, it's a system. So all of that ties together. to kind of tie back into your main point too, when I was looking up some information on this, when you brought it up, just so I could see some statistics for myself, I was coming upon these articles about the plankton that
Yeah.
can eat and break down the plastic, which I've always heard that thrown around as, oh, we don't need to worry about it in the ocean so much because these planktons have developed the ability to eat it and break it down, which is great. But if you read through these articles and do a little bit more research on it,
The
they
populations
they
have greatly declined.
that, and they are also the same plankton that absorbs some of that carbon dioxide from our atmosphere to combat against global warming.
Hmm.
That was their main job before eating plastics. Now that they're eating plastics, they can't do that. So it's actually increasing the amounts of carbon dioxide that end up in the atmosphere because they're not able to do their main job, which is to break down that CO2 and distribute it in the ocean.
You
And
know
that's
what I
one
always
thing.
was taught
Just
as a kid? You remember, I was like, a volcano emits more CO2 in one eruption than all of us in society altogether. Well, that was before I looked into exactly the plankton. So phytoplankton will actually, during an eruption, the sulfur dioxide that gets deposited in the ocean from the plume clouds actually promotes a huge bloom of plankton that then provides so much enriched benefits to not only food sources but to oxygen production and all of these things that greatly benefit. And so it's a nature reaction to the actual mineral deposits that are existing from those eruptions that you can't see until you start to observe from space.
mhm.
And then we became more understanding about that, and it's super interesting. But that was something I always taught, was like, oh, volcanoes cause more pollution than we ever do. It's like,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, but there's also benefits that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah. That's.
Oh, and permafrost.
Yeah.
Like currently, like you can look up in Russia right now, in Siberia, there's getting great mounds that are perfectly symmetrical, but they're growing as the permafrost thaws, and those are emitting all of the dead bacteria and microbes that have been existing below the permafrost for centuries now. And as the permafrost thaws, all of those emissions get released into the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, people don't take that into account either. I mean, you look at COVID and what it's done to everyone. Who knows what's lurking in some of these glaciers and permafrost layers that
Right, all of those.
could,
Like, it grabbed a dog the other day. Did you see
yeah,
that? Yeah, you're taking straight up species that have been
yeah,
extinct forever, and you just got a perfectly preserved specimen. You're like, oh yeah, let's bring that back to the lab. Let's see what's up.
yep. Who knows what, obviously ice ages have wiped out people that caused the permafrost, but who knows what might have wiped out populations prior to that that's now stuck in those layers.
Well,
Amen to that.
that just deep and dark right there. It's just crazy to even think about even some of that. That is part of it we won't have control over directly, but I think the
Yeah.
overall arching here is just be aware and do your part.
I think the key to your statement is also, well, I forgot it already, but whatever. Too busy trying to think of a response. Forgot what you said entirely.
Well, we'll make sure to put links in the description as well to kind of give some more information on this, and feel free to go and help and do your part. I think that's the biggest thing. I'm gonna transition into another topic. Kind of
Wait, just real quick before you do. Did you know that chlamydia also was found 2 miles beneath the surface of the Arctic Ocean?
So there's going to be an outbreak of that now, huh?
Well, I've
Just
had
look
that
that
for a
one
long
up.
time, so I don't know what they're talking about.
That was from March of 2020.
Oh, great.
Oh, so
Yeah.
right around the same time. What's
Yeah.
up with all these pandemics?
All because of plastic bottles.
Yeah.
All right, so my bad. I'm done.
No, so I just want to kind of talk to you guys a little bit of, in our lifetime, what we may see. And part of what, I know it's come up in conversations, not in our necessarily in the U.S., but other countries as well, is universal basic income. It's a fascinating topic, but also there's so many I'm going to butcher that word, so we'll move on. Ins and outs to universal basic income, and I know it's been talked about a little bit, and there's been some bills that I've seen come up, not necessarily stating it, but then also it's been talked about with the stimulus checks that got released during
Yep.
COVID. That is this a test run? Is this potential to continue to grow? And as we continue in these months in COVID, and small changes but not big changes have been made in necessarily an improvement, does you know universal basic income make sense? And I know, other countries have tried it. Ontario, and there's some South African countries as well. Um, and kind of doing some research, it seems like there's always been these trials done. Um, but the big concern with all these trials is you've never really gotten a
Positive result.
positive result, but also long-lasting result or long-lasting uh, data. It's kind of always been short periods of time where this has happened, and so you don't really see, if it's good or bad. It's always been these kind of trial periods. So I just want to get your guys' feedback, kind of in this day and age with COVID going on, and the stimulus checks and those types of things. Is this something that we would see in our lifetime, or
Loaded question, man.
I know
It is.
it is, but it's one of those things that I think one.
I'm gonna let Ray start though, because I talked way too long.
But I think just kind of going into pros, cons. What are your guys' thoughts on it now, and then also in 20 years from now?
I think, I mean, if you want pros and cons, obviously the idea exists to solve a problem, which would be poverty among many places, which is well and great, but this argument has so many more facets than just universal basic income.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at its foundation, I would be under the belief that it would be a good thing. Sorry, just trying to formulate an argument.
No,
It's fundamentally a good thing, but where does that money come from? You start getting into these arguments. How many people do you have to knock down that have worked hard and became successful through other means in order to supplement? I'm not going to say everyone that's living in poverty does it to themselves, because that's 100% not true. But how many people are taking advantage of government systems out there that don't want to work and they don't want to do anything? They don't want to work to become successful, anything like that. How many people are we going to knock down in order to supplement people like that now want a greater lifestyle, uh, greater income bracket, whatever you want to say?
yeah,
you know
a free ride because it's there.
yeah, just a
Yep.
free ride. It would obviously benefit a lot of people, but I think there's so many other means to combat that problem over something that's going to take away from so many other people and then has to be regulated by the government. I mean, just look at existing government programs and how mishandled everything is.
Oh yeah.
There's not really any argument to that. Anyone who tries to argue that Social Security is run well and Medicare is run well has just plain not looked at the data.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the current lifespan to Social Security is that they're estimating, but I think last I heard it's like 14 or 15 years or something like that. If everything continues the way it is when we're going to start running out of money in Social Security. Versus, I'm not going to name any names, but the company I work for has a obvious monetary base, and somehow we're able to grow that by billions every year just through investments and other means. But you take something that's funded so heavily as Social Security, that's the biggest, almost, I believe that is the biggest take from my check. And so if you average that about across everyone that pays into Social Security, why is something like Social Security not growing by billions of dollars a year when it should be? Why can a company that makes a tenth of what Social Security does in a year make billions a year off of investments, but a government-run program can't? And so I think that is my main con to something like universal basic income, is mostly just the fact that a government that tries to run it is going to mishandle the program so bad that we're going to just have a division between classes like we have now.
Yeah.
And that is seen in other communist and socialist countries. Some not as bad as others. Some it's handled better. A lot of the Scandinavian area countries handle things like that better. But then you look at the different class systems in China and Russia, and it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
There's not, everyone's not on the same playing field there. And obviously, those issues stem from other parts of universal basic income. Look at India with the caste system. That's obviously a social system that's been set in place for so long that that's just what they're stuck in. But that's how all of these places end up.
Yeah. Do you think, kind of with our today's climate with COVID and everything else going on, that it's pushed us to try to attempt this more than it has in the past, or do you think that it's
I
still
think
so far out?
because I think because it's such a good buzzword, people will try and implement things like that. And that's what we've been seeing the last few election cycles from people like Bernie Sanders and people who have the same ideals as him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I just think in order to actually fix the problem, we have to go back decades and decades of other societal issues that have led to the problem being as bad as it is now. Why are people's bills so high? Why does it cost so much for healthcare? Why does it cost so much for food and housing these days compared to even 60, 70 years ago? It wasn't nearly as bad. You always hear the argument from baby boomers that we just want to be handed everything and they were able to afford a house on their salaries and things like that. And it's, if you look at the data, it's just not possible these days. As much as they like to blame millennials for that kind of thing,
Yep.
inflation has taken over so much that you don't get what you got for $20,000 back then as you do for $20,000 now.
Yeah. No.
And if you want a super basic form of that, just look at new car prices over the last 20 years.
Oh yeah.
Go back 20 years, you're buying a brand new mid-sized car for eight, $6,000 to $11,000. I bought my first small compact car for like $11,000 out the door. I think if I were to go buy the same similarly equipped car now, I'm looking at $24,000,
Yeah. No,
and
it's
that's
jumped.
over a span of 10 years. So
Just look at new truck prices.
yeah,
I feel like trucks have jumped up the most. It's crazy, but
but I think that is kind of the basis for it, because an argument to this is me and a lot of people I know have pulled through times like this on savings and stuff like that, thankfully still being able to have a stable job. So why couldn't these other people do it? And the argument to that is, well, they didn't have the means to save up a savings prior to this, and now they've lost their job, so they do need something that might be a handout, if not temporarily, like the unemployment act that they passed that gave another $600 a week that benefited a lot of people.
yeah.
And the people that utilized that correctly are the ones that are still doing fine now, even though that program has run out. And then there's widespread amounts of people that did not manage those funds correctly, and they're already out of it.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot to this, and I know that you're trying to keep this at a reasonable time frame on these podcasts, but that topic itself, it really is. I have a lot of views that I could thoroughly explain on it. First of which, is this. I'm not sure if exactly this is how it's coined, but it's moral dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
There's an ethical problem that exists in certain political environments, and this started really at the housing bubble. And I know this isn't directly addressing your question right away, but it builds on something. And essentially, one of the things that happens is that we as a country decided to bail out the banks during the housing bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Now, less money could have been spent to actually write the individuals, all of them, every single person who had a underwater mortgage could have been corrected with less money than it took to bail out the banks.
Yeah.
But the reason it wasn't was because of this moral dilemma that exists that says, why would you reward people who made bad decisions? Now, even though the banks then, provided funds to people who were not able to provide them in subprime mortgages, or, greatly inflated the price of homes in the area, to gain more, bad funds, bad loans. And I was actually a part of that when I got my first house at age 18. It was $34,000, and I was making $500 a week. Um, Fine, but being caught in that exactly in that 2008 time frame, it was really interesting because the decisions that we made was actually to not, or better yet, punish people who got roped into that Ponzi scheme,
Yeah.
not to punish the people who were responsible for doing that.
Yep. That's
And
what I
that
was.
stems over to Social Security then, when you're talking about how is this mismanaged. Yes, it is 100% known that loans have been taken out against Social Security. I sent a message because people who I often try to convince on these topics only listen to Fox News, and so I find Fox News articles and send them to them, like showing this. And so there is in this Fox News article entitled 165 million Americans will witness a Social Security first in 2021, dated September 21st of this year. It goes on to talk about, logically, the problem with Social Security. Lastly, it goes through and it talks about the two points, right? We have a two-party system, and so what do people want to do? And so scrolling through this, there's essentially two sides. The first side of it has to do with what would Republicans like to do? Republicans currently, and this is not quoting, this is just paraphrasing, of course. I just go look up the article. But anyway, the GOP's plan would like to raise the full retirement age from its peak of 67 years in 2022 to as high as age 70. Doing so, this is actually quoting, I'm sorry, I found it. Doing so would require future generations of retired workers, millennials, Generation Z, to wait longer to receive their full payout. That's how they'd like to address the gap. Essentially, here we go. For Democrats, the main proposal would be to increase the payroll tax earning cap, which in 2020 sits at $137,700. And then proposed a plan that would create a donut hole between the current gap of if you make $137,000 to $400,000, nothing's going to change. But after you make $400,000, you're going to get hit with a tax that would increase the taxation to the top 1% earners, to not increase the age of receiving benefits, but to fund the program for the next foreseeable future in several decades. So if you were to go party line specifically on this specific topic of Social Security that we talked about, those are the two options that exist on the table. Tax 1% of the population over $400,000 of base income, or delay the receiving of all three of ours benefits until we're over the age of 70, which the average age, what are we at, 85 years or something like that for the lifespan of what we're expecting to do.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to voting, you're sitting here going, which one actually makes more sense? And regardless of your beliefs on a lot of things, if you just had those two options, which one would you pick? Well, I don't know anybody who makes over 400,000. I don't know who generally looks at it and goes, yeah, those people should be protected. But essentially, if you break it down to that essential thing, which I thought was awesome that Fox News laid it out there as those specific two options, it's crazy that people don't look at it and go, oh yeah, my kids, who are generally the baby boomers that we're talking about, I would like them to be able to receive benefits within the useful life of their existence so they can enjoy retirement or supplement their retirement in some way. Now, moving on to, universal income, it's interesting to see that most of the universal income plans aren't enough to sustain full-on life, right? They're not saying that we're going to substitute enough of your private income to mean that you don't have to work.
Yeah.
It's enough to supplement it. So you either talk about the argument for basic minimum wage increases up to $25 an hour, which the Geneva Convention or whatever appointees just today announced that they would support $25 minimum wage, which is interesting because the timing of your conversation, right?
I didn't even see that article, which is crazy.
I know. I look too much on dumb shit. But anyway, so they just, they said, yeah, we would agree that $25 base minimum wage is enough to live in this time frame. And we know that since 2000, I think it's 2000, the base income from all people has generally increased by only 0.3%. Yeah. That being said, if someone was to supplement our income by, let's say, $1,000 a month, being only $12,000 a year, do you think that's enough to decentivize people from actually working?
I think it depends on where pricing goes. Everyone talks about minimum wage price increases or minimum wage increases leading into product price increases.
Right, and which we would generally not support.
Yeah. No.
There's no reason I'm going to go to Taco Bell and pay what I would at a fancy Mexican restaurant.
And what I don't understand about that argument is it doesn't have to be that black and white. Yeah, there's obviously this is going to hurt a lot of small businesses that can't pay their employees that, so then they're either going to have to drop employees or they're going to have to close their business. But so it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's going to affect people like that negatively. And
well, that's like the whole flat tax doesn't favor the wealthy, right?
Yeah,
it totally does.
Yeah. But
because the opportunity cost of what I can afford is less than what someone else who makes 10
yeah,
times me could afford. It's
and
just common
obviously
sense.
it's going to hurt the larger companies that can't afford it as well, which in turn don't have to increase their pricing to keep the same product. Obviously it's going to cut in their profit, and so the argument there is, do they value their profits over more than they
Well, it's
favor fair wages for their employees?
Certainly do, because they assume the risk, right? They
Yeah,
should be rewarded for that.
yeah.
and then
And
it's
that's where the
That's where you get
universal
into
income
that.
might come in to offset that, saying that you don't have to assume more risk.
But what you brought up about the Democrats' plan to tax the 1%, also, there's 6 degrees of separation to everything with this. There's so many tax breaks and ways for companies to reduce their tax liability to the
Hmm.
point where companies like Amazon aren't paying anything in tax anyway. So it's great taxing the 1%, you know, the ones that pay it, good. It's going to help supplement that funding to something like Social Security, but there's going to be so many people and so many corporations, so many companies that get out of that tax anyway that it ends up not taxing them and just keeps the societal divide between classes the way it is.
Yeah, you should address that. I agree, because you
That's
you are you are looking at a corporate. The reason why it's a corporation is because it's viewed as an actual citizen of the country
Mhm.
under law, and so therefore that individual contributor, that entity, being exempt because of the contributions is wonderful, because you could even see it in small businesses. If someone who owns a small business is able to purchase assets for the purpose of the business, like a vehicle, it's 100% tax write-off. Even though I may use that for 40% of my own personal use, if I have a sole proprietorship or an LLC, 100% I could get out of a lot of taxes that have to do with
Mhm.
my personal needs.
yep.
100%. And I think that's something that everyone should know about too. Like, we're all working from home right now, a lot of us. You could write off the exact square footage, the utility bills associated with that work from home, and you could totally write off everything about that because you're being required to do business out of your home.
Yep.
And it's 100% of a tax off. Please do it.
I have a lot of room for activities.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I just the reason I bring up stuff like that is because that's what people need to look at when they look into things like universal basic income. It is not as black and white as it comes down to everyone's going to get supplemented $15,000 a year. To kick it way back to what we were talking about before, society acts as an organism itself.
Mhm.
So obviously, like we were talking about, one small effect here is going to make such a widespread through all of these other issues and things like that.
Yep.
People have to look at all of that. That's why if we want to rope it to voting, that's why it's so important to be educated as a voter for what you're actually looking at. Look at all of the nuances, everything everything that plays into this and everything that it could affect, because nothing is black and white when it comes to these things. It would, like I said at the beginning, fundamentally, it would be great to have some kind of universal basic income if we lived in a perfect world where everyone was going to get that income and it did not affect any other facet of life. But it brings in so many of these other issues. If I have to take another 10% out of my check to go to universal basic income that I'm already making, then it's going to knock me down so much that why would I want to work if I can just go on these universal basic income and work a part-time job and make the same amount that I do now after accounting for Social Security, Medicare, universal basic income, and taxes coming out as well.
Well, plus, if you just gave me extra 15,000 a year, it would all be play money.
Yeah.
Yep.
None of
Well,
that for me goes to sustainability. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like I don't need anything. So it's so interesting to go like, if you gave me 15,000, I'm going. I would
Yeah.
rather just them bring in like education cost, right? Because we all have college degrees, I think, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's like the costs associated with that are just that's stupid as fuck.
yeah.
Because it's the only organization that is supplemented from the government that has no control over costs. That is stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge barrier.
You
Sorry.
can kick it down fundamentally to that too. Just being how we've strayed from pure capitalism. I know a lot of people are gonna get upset about
No,
that
we're
because
totally not capitalistic.
there's
Totally
so many
not.
people that pushed for socialism, and what we need is a hybrid of these systems. And either that, or if we're going to go one way or the other, if we were to just let capitalism run its course, it would fix a lot of these issues.
But we
You know,
don't.
I know
We totally don't.
if people want to talk about universal health care, income, whatever, if these insurance companies that were provided that didn't have so many regulations against them and were able to compete amongst themselves, prices would be significantly cheaper than they are today.
Oh yeah.
as someone that works in insurance, not on the healthcare side, I can see that just through policyholders for auto insurance at a smaller level.
Really?
Obviously, it's all risk balancing, so that's where a lot of liability comes in and why the cost is the way it is. But so just from the auto insurance side, repair facilities and shops are the ones running the show. Obviously, their pricing has to increase to fix a car year over year, but you you want to look at some stuff at a smaller level, they like to add all their little things here and there that nickel and dime places to death, which in turn directly leads to increased insurance costs because it costs more to repair a car because of their inflated pricing. The same thing goes on at a larger scale through healthcare companies. And one basic thing to look at is how much it costs to get a degree for a doctor, which in itself is a filter to keep people who aren't willing to
Absolutely.
do that out. So that's a good thing. But, obviously, insurance companies have to incur that cost just like anyone that's going to try and go off the street to do that. But if insurance companies didn't exist and these doctors had to compete with each other, you're not going to be paying $100,000 for a surgery when the doctor down the street can do it for $25,000
And he's
for
got
the same
25
quality.
5-star reviews on Yelp.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you can't shop around.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, it's
And
crazy.
they've made that worse and worse over the years. It's
yeah,
here's what's in your network. Good luck if it's not.
yeah. And
And
so the
yeah,
reason I bring that up is if we had a basic income, are they going to start pushing people to certain fast food restaurants that take,
Right. Yeah,
is
you're
it
trying
is
to
it going to be like
incentivize
an
people to
EBT
do
card?
things.
Do you
Yeah.
have to go through a certain lender to get a house? Do you have to go through a certain lender to get a car loan? Are you going to get government supplied cheese and bread like people that are currently on government assistance?
yeah,
A lot of those people that have to take those kind of things don't have the ability to shop around either.
yeah. No,
Did you know that there's actual like I learned this during the pandemic. For those less fortunate who are actually reliant on those programs, if you go through a grocery store and you look at certain brands and barcodes, it actually indicates
Yeah,
which ones you are. So if you don't have to buy those things and they're running low on the shelf, if you're not on those programs, you should default to something different. That way, it allows other people who are reliant on those
yeah.
to get those specific products.
And a lot of people don't know that. I mean,
No, I had no
when
idea
I
until the
when I
pandemic.
was yeah, when I was growing up, my parents were on WIC, which is that basically that
mhm.
system. You walk around the grocery store, you'll see WIC labels everywhere for what falls on WIC and what doesn't. So I know that because I grew up having to have that kind of stuff. But there's so many people out there that didn't, that they don't even know. And I know, obviously, like you brought up, people didn't know that till the pandemic, and I'm sure a lot of people still don't know that. And then you have the other side of the coin where elderly people on similar programs weren't able to go get anything because they couldn't get out of the house and go get things like
Yeah,
that. So it all kind of ties into the same thing.
Yes, we are one. And we actually want to help each other if you
Yeah,
actually ask people.
yeah,
No one wants to do harm to anybody else, but it takes a lot of time to look at all this. It
yeah,
takes a
it
lot
does.
of time to educate yourself to really understand what your actions, where your money goes and what policies exist. And I think that's the closure, right, on this is that it isn't simple.
no,
And even though we have different views on a lot of things, fundamentally no one wants to cause harm to anybody else.
No,
yeah,
and if we could, if it was a perfect world, we wouldn't have to. But there's just so many sides to the coin,
yeah,
and it's tough too because a lot of people that rely on these programs that we talk about that aren't taking advantage of the system, unfortunately, may not have the time to look into these kind of things either.
We'll have to talk about food deserts one day. That's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, Ray, you want to jump into your topic? You want to push it to next week? What are you feeling?
We can push it.
Okay.
We've gone on long enough,
Yeah,
and I
we're
think it was a healthy discussion anyway. There's not really a need for
okay.
another topic, so we can shelve mine. It's not a big
Okay, perfect. So we're
issue.
at 50 minutes right now. So, any last comments that we want to send the viewers with?
No, if
No,
you made it this
Okay.
far, thank you.
Yes, if you made it this
and
far, come back
honestly,
next
if
week.
if anyone has any talking points or feedback about things like this, I would be super interested to hear
Yes.
people's opinions on some of this stuff. If either if you're spoon fed what you hear from the media or you do research for yourself, I'd like to hear both sides of the coin.
Yeah. No.
Anything,
We're
honestly.
always up for communication. So on the YouTube video, feel free to put it in the comments, and we will definitely read those as it comes through. But we do appreciate you guys listening, and we will be back next week with another podcast. Once again, we're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. We'll be on all the social medias here shortly. But feel free to give us a follow on those platforms right now, and we appreciate you guys stopping by.